Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to talk about the imperfect tense in Spanish.
Las metas de esta clase son aprender cuándo usar el imperfecto, poder conjugar los verbos regulares en el imperfecto y poder usar también los verbos irregulares. Our first question is, ¿qué es el imperfecto? What is the imperfect? Now, the imperfect tense is one of the past tenses in Spanish, and we use it to describe continuous or unfinished actions. It's different to the preterite, which describes completed actions. So we kind of use the preterite to talk about actions that are done in a specific point in time in the past, and they're completed actions, like yesterday I went to the beach. Ayer fui a la playa. The imperfect would be like yesterday I was going to the beach, or while I was going to the beach, this other thing happened, or it's used for habitual actions, so things that happened over and over again over a kind of prolonged period in time, like when I was younger, I used to go to the beach a lot. So every time you want to express an idea like when I was younger, or I used to do this, or this used to happen, you're most likely going to need the imperfect tense to do that. So our next question is, ¿cuándo se usa? When is it used? Now there's quite a few contexts when we use the imperfect, and I'm going to go through them in order, and I've numbered them to make it nice and easy to navigate. Now if you've got a pen and paper or your Spanish book handy, you might want to take some notes. So the first one is habitual or repeated actions. For example, when I was younger, I used to play football. Cuando era joven, o cuando era más joven, jugaba al fútbol. Now here we've got when I was younger. It's kind of a prolonged period in the past. It's very different to saying yesterday I went to the beach or yesterday I played football, because that would be a one-off event in a very specific moment in time. That would be 100% preterite. Whereas when I was younger I used to play football, we've got this prolonged period of time and an action that's done many times over that period of time. So that's the key difference. Now the second main case of where we use the imperfect is for actions that were in progress in the past. So for this is kind of where you might see the imperfect and the preterite used side by side quite a lot. For example, cuando salía de la casa, sonó el teléfono. When I was leaving the house, the telephone rang. Or we can think of it as when I was in the process of leaving the house. So the imperfect here, it kind of tells us that this action was taking place, it was in progress, but it wasn't yet complete, and then the preterite tells us what the interrupting action is. Now another example of that same usage would be cuando caminaba por el parque, empezó a llover. So here we've got the imperfect, and here we've got the preterite. So when I was walking through the park, or as I was walking through the park, it started to rain. So you see this quite a lot, imperfect with the preterite side by side. Now the third example is for times and dates. For example, era el 3 de diciembre, it was the 3rd of December. Eran las 9 de la mañana, it was 9 in the morning. And it's eran instead of era because we say son las 9, so we use the plural, unless you're saying it was 1 o'clock. Es la una, era la una, son las dos, eran las dos. Now the fourth way we use it is for talking about someone's age in the past. And again, as I said, if we think of the preterite for kind of a single moment in time and the imperfect for a longer period of time, these sorts of things, they make sense under that same logic, because if you were to say the little girl was 4 years old, she was 4 years old over a prolonged period of time. So that kind of logic will help you to see when to use the imperfect, when to use the preterite. It's all about whether it's kind of in a very specific moment in time or something that's a bit more enduring. Now next we've got descriptions of characteristics, conditions and feelings, and this kind of covers quite a breadth of different examples that I'm going to give you. So first let's take a look at descriptions. We know that we've got ser and estar, two verbs to be in Spanish. One we use for more temporary things and one we use for more permanent things. Now we use ser for talking about physical appearance or personality. For example, mi profesor es alto, my teacher is tall, and in the past tense we're still going to use ser instead of estar, and we're going to use the imperfect for that. Mi profesor era alto, my teacher was tall, y tenía el pelo ondulado, and he had wavy hair. And again, we can make sense of this with that logic of he wasn't tall just for one moment in time, he was tall over a prolonged period of time. So it makes sense that we'd use the imperfect for that. If we're describing rather than a person, a thing or a place, for example, el campo era muy bonito, the countryside was very pretty, again we'd use the imperfect for that. Moving on to the second aspect of this one, so conditions, like being hot or being cold, we'd use the imperfect if we were to say like it was really hot that day or it was really hot that night. For example, hacía calor esa noche. it was hot that night. And again, because it wasn't hot just for 1 minute, it was hot kind of throughout the night. So the imperfect is always expressing this kind of idea of something that takes place over a longer period of time. And with feelings like feeling happy, I could say me sentí feliz in the preterite, but it would mean I was happy for like a moment. If something happened and it made me happy for that moment, that's a perfectly good use of the preterite. Me sentí muy feliz cuando vi su cara. I was very happy when I saw their face. But if I was happy, like with my new job, a happiness that maybe lasts for a few weeks or maybe even a bit longer, me sentía feliz con mi nuevo trabajo. I'd use the imperfect. Now, if you want to take the verb querer, to want, we'd say quiero in the present tense, I want. If you want to put that into the past tense, we could use the preterite again, like with me sentí and me sentía feliz. We've got kind of two options, so it depends what you want to express. For example, if I said, cuando él dijo eso, quise salir de la casa. When he said that, I wanted to leave the house. It would be fine to use the preterite because that's a kind of a desire that takes place in that very specific moment and you want to act on it in that specific moment. But if I wanted to say, for example, I wanted to move to another country and it was a desire that took place over a longer period of time, then I'd say, quería mudarme a otro país. Okay, so sometimes you've got the option of the preterite or the imperfect, but the duration of that verb and what it reflects, the action or the feeling, that's kind of the key to decide which tense to use. So we should now be able to understand what the imperfect tense is and when to use it. And our next step is going to be to take a look at those verb endings. Just a quick reminder to hit that like button if you found this video useful, if you found it interesting. It's just a click of a button or a tap of the screen for you, but it really means a lot to me and it helps me to know which videos people have found most useful as well. Also, if you have any comments, please do use the comment function below. You can say something that you learned, something that you found a bit difficult, and again, it will help me to plan future videos. And if you haven't already done so, please do hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any of the future videos that I'll be posting. If you really don't want to miss out on any of them, you can also turn on notifications. ¿Cómo se conjuga? How do we conjugate it? How is it conjugated? Now, just like with the present tense and with the preterite tense, first we remove the infinitive ending, so the AR, the ER, or the IR from our regular verbs, and then we need to add the imperfect ending. So you probably know the present tense endings, o, as, a, amos, as, an.
O, as, a, amos, as, an. O, as, a, imos, is, en.
And you might know the preterite ones as well. We've got the AR ones, the ER ones. In the imperfect, we've also got two sets of endings. Now for AR verbs, we've got aba, abas, aba, abamos, abais, aban. And then for ER and IR verbs, we've got ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian. And again, exactly the same endings, just like in the preterite, you've only got two sets of endings to learn instead of the three that you've got, for example, in the present tense. So that makes learning the imperfect quite a lot easier. Something to look out for is that the nosotros form is the only AR ending with an accent, and it's important to include that accent because if I say it's pronounced cantábamos with the verb cantar, to sing, if I were to say cantábamos, it changes completely the sound of the word and what's called la sílaba tónica, the kind of emphasized syllable, and then it sounds a bit like vamos, which means let's go. So we want to avoid that because it could be confusing. We want it to always kind of have the emphasis in the same place. Cantaba, cantabas, cantaba, cantábamos, and so on. Now let's take a closer look at those endings. We've got aba, abas, aba, abamos, abais, aban, ia, ias, ia, iamos, iais, ian. And if we take a closer look at them, we can see something very familiar, hopefully very familiar. So we can see that 5 of those 6 endings are just like the present tense endings, just we've got ab or we've got an I accent in front of it. Because the present tense AR endings are o, as, a, amos, ais, an. So you've already got those up here, hopefully, if you've learned the present tense really well. If you feel like that's a bit rusty, you can always watch the present tense video on my channel. So instead of having to learn 2 completely new sets of endings, we can use what we already know about the AR endings in the present tense and just remember the aba and the ia, because we've just got to add that ab or that I accent before them. And to help you remember this, you can think of the group ABBA and their very famous song Mamma Mia. Okay, so think of the imperfect tense as ABBA and Mamma Mia. Okay, Spanish teachers all over the world probably use this example. and it's a really useful way to remember, because then you can think, okay, aber, abas, aber, and you're just applying the kind of the pattern from the AR verb endings from the present tense, and mamma mia, ia, okay, ia, ias, ia, and again applying those present tense AR verb endings. So it's super useful because you're just applying what you know to learn these in a really easy way. Practiquemos, let's practice. Now remember to remove the infinitive ending, that's step 1, and then step 2, add one of your imperfect verb endings, the aber ones or the ia ones. So aber for AR, ia for ER and IR verbs. So here I've got some verbs that I'd like you to conjugate, and I've given you the pronouns so you know which ending to use. For example, yo, I, so I used to dance. Bailar, the verb to dance, so we want to say I used to dance. Now I'll do this one with you just to show you my kind of thought process. So bailar is the verb to dance. I want to put it in the I form. It's an AR verb, so it's going to be one of the aber ones. The I form is aber, so I remove the AR and then I add aber. Yo bailaba. So now I want you to pause the video and then go through and do those yourself. You can either do them in your head and say them out loud if you can, or if you've been asked to do this for homework or you'd find it useful, you can write them down as well. Okay, let's go through. So we should have yo bailaba, tú bebías, you used to drink, ella cantaba, she used to sing, nosotros visitábamos, we used to visit, and hopefully you've remembered to put the accent on that one. Vosotras hablabais, ellos escribían. Okay, so check that you got those correct, and then we will move on and do a bit more practice. Okay, so now we've got 1 to 5, we've got sentences with just a word missing. I've given you the verb in the infinitive. They're all regular, so you just need to follow those steps. Remove the ER, the AR, the IR, and add your aber ending or your ia ending. So again, when you're ready, pause the video, complete this, and then we'll go through the answers. So we should have ellas leían las revistas mientras esperaban, tú escribías muchos libros, nosotros asistíamos la iglesia los domingos, yo siempre compraba la comida los viernes, y usted trabajaba en Chicago. Now for a bit of an extension activity, if you'd like to do this, or if you've been asked by your teacher to do this, I'd like you to translate the phrases. So just pause the video and translate those. Depending on your level, you might find this easy. If you find it too challenging, or you just really want to get the basics of the imperfect, then you can always just skip past the next minute or so of the video. Okay, so if you've done those translations, we should have, they read the magazines whilst they were waiting. Or you could say they were reading the magazines whilst they were waiting. You used to write many books, or lots of books. We used to attend church on Sundays. I always bought, or I always used to buy the food on Fridays. And you used to work in Chicago. And that's the formal you, because remember we've got tú, you informal, and usted, you formal in Spanish. So we should now be able to conjugate regular verbs in the imperfect. We're just taking off the ending, the AR, the ER, the IR, and then we're adding our aber endings or our ia endings, which hopefully we can memorize quite quickly by remembering that they follow that same pattern of o, as, a, amos, as, an, but it's just a, as, a, amos, as, an with aber or the ia pattern. So really nice patterns for us to follow and to learn those. Our next step is going to be able to conjugate key irregular verbs, and you'll be really happy to know that there aren't many of them whatsoever. Now the good news, or perhaps the great news, is that there are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect tense. We've got the verb ir, the verb to go, which goes to iba, ibas, iba, íbamos, ibais, iban, and you'll notice that though it's quite irregular, it still follows that pattern of a, as, a, amos, ais, an. Instead of ab, we've just got ib. Iba, ibas, iba. Okay, so it's kind of similar just to the aber endings. We're just changing all the a's to i's, and that gives us the entirety of the verb to go in the past tense. For example, cuando era joven, iba mucho a la playa. When I was young, I used to go a lot to the beach. So that's how we might use that one in a sentence. The second one is the verb ser, one of the verbs to be, and we've already seen some examples of this. Cuando era joven, when I was young, you've got a, as, a, amos, ais, an. So that same pattern throughout. And the third one, which is only kind of slightly irregular, we have ver, the verb to see or to watch. And the only thing that's irregular about it is that it keeps the e. So instead of removing the er off of ver, we just remove the a.
Before you go, I'm just going to quickly explain how to make the most of using Spanish with James. If you head over to the main channel, you'll find on the landing page that there are lots of different sections. There's a section for beginner Spanish with all of the beginners level videos, there's one for intermediate Spanish, advanced Spanish, and there's one for poetry as well. So it's all nicely organised so that you can find the videos that are right for you at where you're at on your Spanish journey. And again, if you haven't already done so, it'd mean a lot if you just very gently click that subscribe button. And that brings us to the end of the video. Muchísimas gracias por ver este video y espero que te vaya muy bien con el español.